Yeah, we just deleted the last recording. I just rage quit out of it. All right. So we're doing the recording again. All I've kind of done up to this point is just exported the pulley out with 2 subdivision smooth on it. So it has nice kind of smooth details, and started a new project in Painter using the same PBR preset in a 2048 by 2048 resolution. And then we also baked the mesh maps: world space, ambient occlusion, curvature, and position. So now that we have the steel painted material there, that looks pretty good. We're going to kind of get out of that. Oh, is this not? But yeah, it's still recording. Good. Make a new folder. And let's try to find one for the rust. Now, it's obviously metal, but you're not really going to see much metal on the reference image at all. It's pretty much been completely coated with rust at this point. So I'm going to type in rust. We'll see what we got for options here. Iron chainmail. That's sweet. Unfortunately, we'll not be able to use iron chainmail for this.
Where are you doing that under?
I'm under the materials, and I'm just doing a search for rust.
Coarse?
Yeah, what do you think? Coarse? I think coarse is probably the closest one. The color's a little off, but I'm not too worried about that. This one's not bad, but just texturally, it's a little different than kind of what it looks like in the reference. And steel rust is not helpful at all. So I'm going to use, I think, rust coarse, and we'll drag that to the other folder. Now, depending on the order that your folders are stacked in the layers, you may be seeing the rust cover the paint, or it could be the other way around where your paint is still covering the rust. It doesn't really matter which way you do it. I'm probably going to move my paint above it, since that's technically what it's supposed to be doing. Like, the paint is on top of the metal, not the other way around. So I'm going to call this rust group, and I'm going to move this below the paint. So my paint group is sitting on top of the rust group. And maybe real quick, just to kind of knock this out of the way, I'm going to go to the rust material and try to fix some of like the scale issues with it, and maybe work on the color just a little bit. Now, the scale's not bad. I mean, it's rust, but if you sort of look at the reference, you can see how like tame that is. It's not really that kind of doesn't have that much variation to it. I think the big thing is darkening this quite a bit first. Like, that is a lot darker, not as saturated. So on this material, thankfully this one does have color options. So I'm just going to click on it and probably kind of go down here a little bit. Not that far. There we go. Maybe around like that. That should be okay for now. So I'm just darkening mine a little bit, pulling out a little saturation. That kind of feels okay. The normal and height, you really can't see much of that. If I kind of shift and right click to move the light around, you can see it's a little bumpy. But I think my bigger issue right now is more of just the scale of the rust pattern. Doesn't this feel kind of like big and chunky? Yeah. So how do we change that? Right. On the properties of this material, to scroll up to the top where it says like UV projection, the UV scale, rotation settings, I'm going to scale mine up. And by scaling it up, you can see it's a much more tame version of what we had previously. And one thing you could do, I probably should have done this before I scaled it. I do like to check to see if UV projection or triplanar is going to work better, like just understanding which one you kind of like. Do you guys, like when you did your UVs, like do you guys notice any seams, like looking at the top of the pulley, if you just kind of rotate around it? Because if you don't see any seams, you're probably fine. But if you notice any weird like vertical cuts going through the pulley, just depending on how you UV'd it, you could try swapping this over to triplanar, which might hide that. I think mine was okay as UV. Now, do you guys kind of know what the difference is between these? I know you've probably been clicking between them every so often just to kind of see what happens, but do you remember like why we're picking one or the other?
One is a projection, like on the 3 axes, and the other one is just for UV.
Yeah. So UV projection is like the same thing as you going into Photoshop and just finding an image of rust and just slapping it over the whole thing. Now, that could be fine, but if you had maybe like this UV'd improperly where like pieces were cut up, like if there was like a seam running through here and this was split for some reason, that would show up in this type of texture issue. Like you'd see a line slicing through the pulley. This doesn't use the UVs. This is just like projecting, like you were saying, projecting the texture from all the different orthographic angles, which can kind of get around texture seam issues. All right, now that we've done that, we'll kind of look back at the reference. I think the big thing is trying to get some of the breakup, because you'll notice that generally we're seeing like on the corners, there's that kind of rusted detail where it's revealing the rust behind it. So let's try doing that. What is going to be my best way to get the rust to show up on the edges? Yeah, that metal edge wear generator. Now, since my blue paint group is sitting above the rust, I can then click on it. We're going to make a black mask. Okay, so it disappears. I'm not seeing anything yet. And on the mask, when you have it selected, we're going to go up to the Effects button, and we're going to pick Generator. And click on the Generator button down at the bottom, and pick Metal Edge Wear. And there we go. Now, what is our next problem? Just looking at kind of the result. Yeah, it's flipped the wrong way. So we can hit the invert button on the generator options, which should be, right in your properties. If you're not seeing that, just make sure you are selecting that fill layer that has the generator. Okay, it's flipped. Now, it's not too bad. Like, let me kind of look back at the reference here. One thing with this, though, is you'll notice that the edging in the reference does feel a little more erratic and kind of chunky in certain areas. This is still like a really smooth, kind of even breakup. So what we could do is maybe play around with like the wear level. This is just kind of scaling it in closer to the edge. I might want to add a little bit of grunge, which is a little bit farther down, grunge amount. This, if you kind of move grunge up, you'll notice you start getting some rusty pieces like in the middle of the blue paint. But I do like how this one is adding better detail on the edge. I'm just bringing up grunge amount. Something like this. I'm going to crank it up to like 0.7. That kind of feels okay. And we're done with the pulley. All right, let's pack it up. So this is a really good starting point. Now, the one thing that is a little tricky with this guy is pretty much all of you would be able to get to this spot here, where you have like that edge detail figured out. But when you look at the reference, you'll start noticing there's parts of the pulley where it is completely rust. Like the whole top is mostly rust aside from paint chips. If I go back, like this is the underside of the pulley. This whole kind of middle part is very similar to the top, where it's mostly rust with a bunch of like blue paint chips. Okay, and let's look at the inside wall. Almost all rust on here. So this has been completely worn away, except for some paint chips that are it's probably still in the threading, couple scattered around, a little bit in this little notch right here, but for the most part, that's also rust. And the notches, you can tell, are much more worn down. So some of these we can fix. Like I definitely know that the inside should be predominantly rust. That's an easy one. So how do I get this part to be completely rust? Yeah, that's where we do like that little UV chunk selection where you're just kind of blanketing an area with like an alpha. So let's try this out. Above the generator, we're going to do an effect, add a paint. So I have a paint layer. Over on the left side, we're going to pick Polygon Fill. I'm going to click in the properties, the UV chunk button. We'll take the little checker. And now remember, we're going to pick white or black for what we're filling it. If I pick white, it's going to make the blue paint visible. I actually need to slide this down to black. So put it to black, and then simply click on those two UV shells. You could also do it in the 3D view, but click on the inside area, look for your shells, and you should notice that it turns it completely rusty. Like that's what mine did. That's me turning it black in that area with that UV chunk. Now, the next issue we're running into is going to be trying to get the top, the underside here, which you can't really see, but like this area right here should be all rust. And there's also one small detail that you can barely see. Look on the edge. See that like ring that's kind of going around the top? Like the pulley is actually made up of a few different pieces. So there's like a part that's like stuck in the other part that goes around it. It's almost like a socket. And there's this like little thin rusted line that goes all the way around this guy. That would be really nice to get that in there somehow. And I have a feeling because it's so subtle. Like if I look at my curvature, you can kind of see where it's sort of picking up the line, but that looks terrible, right? Like it's such a small area that my curvature map isn't really picking that up. So I have a feeling like even if we did some like generator and had it pull from curvature, it's going to be extremely difficult to get that to actually work. It's just not enough detail. It's way too small of a section. This is where ID maps can come into play, and they're going to help us out. So on the documentation, you guys start going through this, you'll notice there's a giant section of the docs where, well, not this one, wrong activity. There's a big section of that where I actually talk about the process of getting the ID maps exported out of Maya. So I'm back in this one just for a second. I'm going to scroll down. We've done most of this. I am at the point right here where we're kind of trying to figure out how to get the top to be rusty. So these are ID maps. They're just typically like flat colors on different parts of the model. You guys will also see something like this when you get to compositing. They use this in plates all the time where you'll have different colored objects. So if the compositor wants to change the color of something in the shot, he can quickly do it in post, not re-rendering it over and over again. So I just need to get a material or like an FBX file out of Maya that has those colors already set up on it. So I'm going to go back into Maya. So we'll go back into your Maya scene if you're not already in there. And I'll walk you guys through the process. So to do this, we need to assign just super flat red, green, blue colors. So you'll notice that like most of the pulley is black, right? Right now we kind of have that default gray Lambert on it. You guys probably have that Pixar surface on it if you're kind of pulling from the lab project. What we're going to do is go in the Hypershade, and I want you guys to make 4 new Lamberts. So you can use Tab, make a Lambert, and I want 4 of these guys total. And you can also get to them through the Maya surface area. They're right there. So make 4 Lamberts. And once you guys have done that, I want you to rename them to something like ID black, ID red, ID green, ID blue. Just rename them so they're sort of named according to the color that you're going to use for the ID map. So this will be ID black. I'm just double clicking like where it says Lambert. You can also rename them up here on the top in the browser. If you hold down Control and double click, that'll rename it. So Control double click in the browser will also do the same thing. This will be ID red, green, and ID blue. And obviously you can pick whatever color you want, but for the sake of the project, I'm just kind of leaving it as just your kind of typical RGB values. But if you had like an ID map where there's more areas you wanted to control, you could make it yellow, magenta, brown, doesn't really matter, any color. So once we have all these different materials created, I'm going to select the black one. We're going to go into the properties, and I want to change this color to black. So I'm going to make the color of the material match the name. That is a black Lambert. This guy is going to be red. I'm just picking red from like the default colors at the top. Green and blue. Let's start off by assigning the black material to the whole thing. So I'm just going to have this guy selected, right-click on my black Lambert, assign material to selection. And you should notice that it looks black now, even in your scene, unless you guys have that Use Default Lambert button turned on at the top. But it should look completely black. Now here comes the tricky part. How do we assign these to the right areas? Because, like, for example, like if you're trying to match this exactly, let's say you want to get the red on the top part, what is going to be the quickest way for me to select all those top faces? Maybe through UV shells. Let's try it. So let's say we're like looking at our UV map, because that's like usually my go-to is like, is there an easy way to do it with the UV map, just the way it's broken up? Now for me, there is not. I mean, I could maybe do some weird tricks where I'm like running, edge loops in here, and then hoping, doing something like, oh, not that one. Come on, edge ring. That kind of works. I think I showed you guys the edge ring thing way back when we were doing like the UVs for this guy. So like I'm trying to like get an edge loop to turn to edge rings. You can see that didn't work out too well. It's like doing about half of the top. That's wonderful. So I don't really think selecting it through these tricks like that is going to work out too well. So what I'm going to do instead is back here, I'm actually going to go to one of my orthographic views. So I'm going to go to this, like the left or the right camera. I don't know if this is how you guys are getting to these, like holding down spacebar and kind of clicking on them. But hold down space, click where it says Maya in the middle, and pick your right camera. Or not. Seriously? Or left, any camera? Okay, we're apparently not doing that. Change of plans. We're doing it this way.
I run into this all the time.
Oh my goodness. Oh good, we're at the top. That's almost what I wanted.
It's like, I'll just live on my top.
Good times.
Yeah, I get this all the time.
We're just going to do it this way.
It hits a bunch of times.
Yeah, I don't know why this is being so kind of finicky. But yeah, up here in panels, orthographic, you can do it right there. All we need to do though is, because you can see this is still relatively flat, the pulley in your scene on the book might be rotated a little bit. Does it look completely flat? Or is there a little bit of a tilt to it? The one that's sitting on the book. If it's flat, you're good. Like it's not.
Might be a little bit of a tilt. That top line shows up a little bit.
Yeah, because if it looks like it's just, I can't remember if I like rotated it. It might be really small, like a 1 degree kind of tilt on the book, so it's sitting on it properly. If you wanted to, what you could do is, if you still have the original pulley UV model somewhere, like hidden in the scene, you could just unhide that and do it with that guy. Like the one that you UV'd, not the one on the book. But either way, if I just go to like my face selection mode, I'm going to kind of zoom in a little bit. Let's get rid of this thing. And I'm going to just marquee, use my selection tool. I'm just going to marquee over the top, right like that. So I'm just barely getting it. And I actually think I might have gone just a little too far. That's probably okay. I'm kind of getting this one extra row of faces on there, but that should be fine. There we go. So I'm just kind of marquee selecting across the whole top, barely going over it, and you can see I'm getting kind of what I wanted right there. So if I go back, which, okay, I can't go to perspective again. Go back here, that's the top part selected. And we're going to go back into the hypershade, and this was going to be the red color So I'm just going to, while those faces are selected, I'm going to right click on the red Lambert and assign material to selection. So I don't know if you guys have ever had to do that. Did you guys know you could assign materials to faces? Yeah. You don't do it that often, but there's definitely a place for it. Okay, so now I've got that working. Perfect. Okay, now we also have green on the bottom. Let's see. I'm going to do this guy. And I also want to figure out where the green needs to stop. So I think it needs to stop right at that lip right there. It's on the underside of the pulley. Yeah, that's where it needs to stop. So I want to get it so the green kind of fills this whole middle area. Yeah. Yeah, red up there. This is going to be green. So the green one, this one's going to be a little slightly more complicated, but it's not that bad. I'm going to go back in here. Okay. And I think what we're going to try doing is I'm going to get, let's see here. All right, actually, I know what we're going to do. I'm going to get all of the edges selected on the outside. This is kind of like the top where I don't think, like if I can't really select it through the orthographic view on this one because it's still very flat. But what I think we can do is if I zoom in, I'm going to look at the outside edge of this bottom part. Zoom in. My poor laptop's struggling right now. I'm going to click on this guy, and I'm going to look for the edge right before I get to that bevel. So you know that line right there is where I want the green to start. I'm actually clicking out here, and I'm going to go to this guy and shift double click. You should see it like run an edge loop between those 2 points. This is also on the bottom of the pulley. This is the bottom, the underside. And I'm running an edge loop from the, pick one of your outside edges, and then shift double click on an edge that's in the same loop line, but that's right next to the bevel. You should see it draw like and connect the edge loop between those 2 points. The bevel is that kind of thicker circular loop that's going around it, like where my mouse is highlighting it. So it should be from there, shift, double click to there. It'll run an edge loop. This will be in the video. So, and I'll sit down with you guys one-on-one if anyone gets stuck. All right, so we got that. I'm going to do an edge ring from here. So in the viewport, I'm going to command right-click. And you can see we have edge ring utilities in the bottom left. We're going to go down to edge ring utilities to edge ring. Now it has a selection of all the edges on the outside part. I want the opposite of this, right? I'll do this again. I know it's a few. Yep. Yeah, this smoother mesh is pretty slow. And we have Painter open. I'm recording a video. I'm on the projector. This poor laptop's about to blow up. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because from here, if I hold down Shift and marquee select over this whole area, I'm going to hold down my Shift key. I'm going to marquee select over this whole section like that and release. Oh, wait, sorry, let me back up. One thing we have to do before we do that is I'm also going to command right-click in the viewport, go down to Faces, to face. There we go. So this is what I meant to do first, sorry. So I have like the face selection version of like those edges that we picked. And then I'm going to, now that I'm in face mode, hold down Shift and marquee select over that section. So when you hold Shift, you can kind of see what it did, how it almost did like an invert, where it like, here's what I had before. When I Shift select with the marquee over it, it flipped it. So this is now the correct part here. But I have all this extra junk that is kind of taken with it. How do I remove that stuff? You can, if you hold down Control and marquee will deselect sections too. So I'm just going to like Control kind of through here just to get rid of all that other stuff. And then we end up with that. You guys want me to do that again? The silence is worrying. You could probably do it with like a lasso if you're really careful with it, or maybe the paint selection tool. I'm kind of curious. Let me see if that actually works. I'm kind of wondering. Making all these changes on what, sorry? Yeah. We'll do the one that's smoothed, whatever that is. Like the whatever one you did like the smoothing operation on, that one. I know it's pretty laggy. You could try deleting the history too, because if you have the history still from that smooth, that could be part of the reason why it's so slow. So let me just, I'll even try doing that. Wow, this is so slow. So I'll just do it one more time, and then we'll kind of move on from this. So what I did, we're going to zoom in here. It's a little bit weird to get this selection, but you basically have to go to Edge, click on an edge on the outside part of the bottom, running this way. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm just following that loop visually right down to the bevel to right here. I'm going to Shift, double click. That just connects the edge loop together from those 2 points. What do you mean your edges?
That edge is connected to have a full solid rim.
Okay. Oh, because your UVs are a little different than mine, I guess. Let me look at, yeah, I might have to look at what you're seeing. Oh, so you have like a whole other piece up here. Yeah, this looks over. So you're going from like one of these edges way out there to like that one. Yeah, so you guys may have it like set up slightly different, where you have like the bottom might go farther out, where it wraps over the top of the bottom. I know everyone's UVs are a little different, but once I have that little edge loop selected in the viewport, I was command right clicking, edge ring utilities to edge ring. That gives me all the edges running around the outside part. From here, I'm going to command right click again to faces, to faces. Yep. I mean, the good thing here, like this is not like a, you can still get this to work, even if the ID map doesn't work for you guys, you can still kind of get this to work by manually painting that section in Painter if you feel like it's easier. Because I know some of you are fighting with it. I'm showing you the ID map. Obviously, you could, if you spent some time in Painter, trace around this area on the underside and kind of do it that way.
So we don't have to do that either.
No, I'm not like going in there looking for it. I think it'd be nice for you guys to try it. Even if you get the other areas working and you just don't get the bottom, even that's fine. It's really just to help you guys out so you can see it and so we can kind of isolate those areas easier in Painter. So now that I've got that on the underside, I'm going to again hold down Shift, and I'm just going to marquee over that whole area to invert my selection. So Shift, select over that, and now I'm going to hold down Control to try to deselect all the little extra areas that were still hanging out. If it's not working, it's not a big deal. You can just kind of keep the red one on the top and just ignore this part. And you can just try to paint it manually when you're in Painter. But since I have it working, I'm going to put the green color on this one. How many of you guys did get that working? Like you got to that point? 1. Hooray. This is easy. Oh, there we go. And assign the green to those faces. There we go. Okay. We got that. Or I have that, and one person has that with me. We have that. This one is a little easier. It's not nearly as complicated. So this is the lip I was trying to control for that really thin line of rust that was going around the top. So to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a little bit wider of a section than I think I need. But let me zoom in on this. I think what I'm going to do is go from, okay, I'm going to do like this edge right here. I'm looking at the top. And I'm going to shift double click to this guy. It's a little wider than like technically what I probably need, but we can always erode away at that using blurs and whatever. So I'm just kind of selecting a little more than I need. This is that thin lip on the top of the pulley. If I zoom in, it's right there. So I'm just shift double clicking between a couple edges, getting that chunk. Command right click to edge ring. Command right click to face. That one's not nearly as bad. So when you have the little loop set up, command right click to edge ring, and then you command right click to face. And then once you get that, you can assign the blue Lambert to it. Yep, yeah, mine's doing that too right now. It's really annoying. That was our only solution. Delete history. If that doesn't work, well, it's the way it is. All right, so that should be pretty close to what I had in here. You can tell that looks very, very similar. So just see if you guys can pull it off. Again, we're really grading just the final result, so it's not that big of a deal if you can't get it figured out. It just means when you're in Painter, this is going to be a little trickier because we're going to have to kind of manually paint in some of those areas. Now, which one? The bottom? Like how to do it? I went right to like right where that bevel is. Like I'm actually going one, I think, face beyond it. And that, but even if we go a little bit too wide or too farther in, there's a lot of ways in Painter for me to like move that in and out. Yeah. Yeah, anything close to that should be good. Okay. Now this is going to be used to make the ID map. Now that we have that. This was clearly the easiest thing you've done all month, right? It was the easiest part, or the hardest part for the month wasn't Painter. It was making flat colors on the model. So we are going to select the object. Now that we have the colors on the right spot, I'm going to go up to File. We're going to export it out as an FBX again, just like we did previously. Export selection. I'm going to put it in the same folder that we have the other one hanging out. So this is still going in that painter folder for the pulley. I don't want to overwrite the previous one. We're going to leave it. You're going to name this pulley ID. So it's a completely different FBX file. This is specifically for the ID. We're not overwriting the other one. And just export it. You probably won't get any warnings on this one because there's no RenderMan materials assigned to it, so it probably is fine. Now to use this, we're going to go back in Painter. Here's the moment of truth to see if it worked. I'm going to go to my texture set settings. So this is kind of where we were choosing like the AO maps and the world space and curvature, all that stuff, and we kept skipping over ID map every time. We finally need to do an ID map. So go back in your texture set settings, go into the bake mesh maps once again, turn off all of the other guys because we've already created these. We don't need to recalculate that again. You only need to turn on the ID. Now for the ID, you can see like if you kind of click on it, like where it says ID, it'll take you to some parameters. It says vertex color. We are not using vert colors. We're using material colors for this. So click where it says ID, you'll see this pop up. Change it to material color, and hue shift is fine. Now, this is not going to know where to pull it from at the moment, because it's only looking at what's inside a painter. We have a separate FBX file that we're using for this. So if you go back up to common, right here, where it says high definition meshes, hit that button and load in the pulley ID. It's like this section right here. Hit that little file looking thing. Open. So that is now using the pulley ID for only this guy, and it should look at the various material colors on it. So let me try it out. Let's make sure it works, and I'll do this again in case it doesn't. That looks promising for me. Let me just kind of go through it. It worked. Do you guys want me to do that again? Yes, if you want to see it, B is going to go through your mesh maps. This is a mesh map. C is your material properties, like normal, height, roughness, color. So B and M is material. And remember too, if you guys ever need to, you can always go through the drop down in the viewer and just find the one you want to pick through here.
How did you get the view? How did you change the view?
To the what do you mean change the hue? Like to see it?
For the ID?
Let me actually get rid of it. We do this again. So under Bake Mesh Maps, you have this turned on, right? Okay, so you have that. You have these set to material, color, and hue shift.
Click on ID.
Yeah, yes, actually click on ID
Yeah, click
on the word.
there.
Yeah. It's kind of weird because you don't realize it, but when you're clicking on it, it's actually like scrolling you through this one long menu. But under ID, you just leave it as material color and hue shift. And then you click on common to kind of go back to the root settings for everything. And where it says high definition meshes, you're going to hit the little file button on the right, load in your pulley ID. You should see it in a list, like showing up here. And then you hit Bake Mesh Maps.
What is that output size for?
So this is actually the size of the mesh maps. Like, these are textures. You know how when we started the Painter project, you guys were doing like 2048 by 2048. So this is just the resolution for the mesh maps. Some of you guys actually were setting it to 2048 when I was going through your Painter files, and that's totally fine. What's that?
I was matching it to the resolution.
Yeah, if you're doing that, that's totally fine. I just find that typically these, because they're not really visible, they're more of just like a utility trick for some of the generators. You can kind of get away with having it set to a smaller resolution and it's still going to work. So it's not really that big of a deal if you have it set to 1024 or 512, 2048. You're probably still going to get a decent looking result. So there we go. All that to get this guy in Painter. Well, that was fun. I'm going to hit M, go back to material. Now, we can now pull from that to start selecting areas that we want to turn to rust, because we want to remove the paint. So you know how before, like if I kind of go up here and look at this mask, we're using paint layers, and then we're doing that polygon fill to click on the shells, right? This is a little bit different. We're now going to pull from the ID map that we've created. So what you're going to do is go to the mask for the blue paint. Go to your effects. And you'll notice there's one at the bottom called Add Color Selection. You're picking that one. So this is going to put a color selection effect on the group. This is, you can tell it's using the ID map. That's what it's made for. So it's already loading, like that looks good. And it wants me to pick a color. As soon as I hit pick color, watch the viewer. It's like, oh, you want to pick from the ID map. And you just simply click what you want. And you can tell again, like it's looking for what color you want to put it to. Right now it's set to white. We want to keep putting it to black because we're trying to remove blue paint on the top. I don't want, white is going to add blue paint to it. It already has blue paint there. I don't want this. So I'm moving the output value to black. And when I pick color, if I click where it has the red, there goes the paint. And I'm going to do that again. Okay, we're going to go in here, pick color. Whoa, not that part. Just did the whole pulley. Pick color, green. Now the blue one for that thin line, let me do it and I'll kind of show you what it looks like. It might work. So pick color and we'll zoom in. We'll try to get the blue. Okay, so the blue technically worked. And you can tell like it's there, but that doesn't look too good, right? Because it's a really like pixelated result. Now, if any of you guys do have the larger mesh maps like 2048, this could be a case where this looks a little bit cleaner when you do it, because I have like a lower resolution. I'm not a big fan of that, personally. I'm going to remove the blue. You can hit that little minus down here in the properties. We're going to get rid of that. We're going to do this a different way for that part. But for the most part right now, we have a decent looking result by removing those areas. Now kind of going back here, there are a bunch of things we can do to like add paint chips. So if we look at the reference, you can see now that we have mostly rust, we want to start adding in those blue paint chips on the top to kind of show that stuff. There's also blue paint chips on the inside. What would be some easy ways for me to add like paint chips to these areas?
Stencil and eraser.
Yeah. Yeah, doing like a stencil and just kind of like painting black or painting white to kind of put that back in there. Because right now, if I look at the mask, like there is no blue paint at all because it's solid black. So what I need to do is include these little white paint chip patterns.
You like add a yellow layer and add a black mask at the top and get a paintbrush brush.
Yeah, basically, we're going to do white for it. But I'm going to actually go online, and I'm going to see if I can find some interesting chip paint. I know some of you guys were pulling from like the reference before. A few of you were doing that probably for the scraper and the book to get like the bind and the text. We could actually try that if you want. That might be pretty accurate, since we do have reference photos. I don't know if one is nice and even. That one's kind of close. Oh, this one at the way bottom might work, or that guy. All right, I'm going to try using this to create a stencil. So I'm going to see if I can get some of these different paint chips effects right here. If you want, like if you have an issue pulling from this reference photo to make an alpha, you could do something just like in Google, like chipped paint metal. And if you find any image that has like similar kind of paint chip patterns, like some of these guys might be okay. Like even this, though that looks a little bit weird, you could maybe pull patterns from this. This guy has some interesting shapes that are still kind of similar to it. So it doesn't really matter where you pull it from. There's a lot of ways to get these little alphas built. Actually,
You make an alpha to UV and Photoshop and then bring it in as an alpha and
yeah, we're gonna like find a photo that has paint chips, bring it into Photoshop, turn it to an alpha, so it's like black and white, and then we're just gonna start blasting that on the model. I'm actually gonna try using this one. This isn't even the reference, but it's the same idea. So I just did a search for chipped paint metal, and kind of a little bit farther down, this guy popped up. Let's see if I can use this. All right, I'm going to just right-click and copy it. Because the reason I'm kind of picking this one too is because this guy isn't just one paint chip. There's like a bunch of different pieces I can pull from on it. So I can move this guy around with the stencil and pick from a ton of them to get different effects all across this guy. This one might be pretty useful. But feel free to find a different one if you want. I'm going to go into Photoshop real quick. I just need to convert this to a black and white alpha. So you can save it, open up Photoshop. So I'm just opening this up. And right now, if you kind of look at my mask, it's black, right? So to get white paint chips, I need white in this area, correct? All right, so what does this need to look like? It should be white paint chips with black around it. This is really easy to do in Photoshop. All I need to do is desaturate it so it's grayscale, and then use levels and kind of play around with the contrast. So if I do Command U, I'm just using the shortcuts, but you guys probably know how to get to them through here. This is HSV, like a hue saturation. Pull the saturation out of it, and then I'm going to do a levels just to like start creating a much harsher alpha, something like this. That's pretty good. And I'm going to save this in that painter project. So I did a hue saturation to desaturate my image, and then I used levels to kind of force it into like a much harsher black and white. And I'm just going to save this as a PNG, and we'll use that in Painter for like our stencil. How'd you guys like using the stencil for the scraper? Did that work out pretty well, like moving it around, just kind of hand painting over it? That probably felt like a lot easier sometimes when you're trying to get very specific areas to line up than like using just like a brush. Because brushes still feel like it's a brush. All right, let's back up. I'm going to go in my lecture project, Painter, metal pulley. So I'm just going to put it in the same spot where I'm dropping like my FBX files and the Aspen. We're going to save this as PNG, and it doesn't really matter what you call it. We'll just maybe say paint chip alpha, something like that.
So bring that into our alpha.
Yeah, right. In Painter, we're going to import that into the alpha for the resources. Yeah. All right. That should be good. I'm going to get out of this. Let's go over here. So to import this resource, so now that we've got a cool looking alpha texture, I want to use it. So down in the shelf, I'm going to do import resources. Add. There's my image I created. Open. This is going under alpha. And import my resource to the project. And there it is. So under my alpha menu, it's already popped up. Paint chip alpha. So for this to be a stencil, because I want to paint white, I can only use stencils on paint layers, right? I'm still manually painting this. So on the mask, make a paint effect. So now we have a paint. We're going to look for the stencil. Okay, so when you're on the paint, make sure you're on your brush tool over here in the top left. Scroll through your properties and look for the part where you see the stencil. Because right now I don't have anything loaded in my stencil, it's just empty. So I'm just scrolling through my brush properties on the paint layer, and eventually near the bottom we see there's stencil, no resource selected. I'm just going to drag this image we made onto that stencil box. And you should, depending on your display settings, you should be seeing some kind of faint overlay that looks like that. But again, remember though, if you guys need to, you can change the opacity of it by going into your display settings, the third button down. Way at the bottom, there's different things for like, do you want to hide it when you're painting? What's your, what opacity do you like?
I just have it coming up as like a brush. I don't have it like filling in the screen.
Do you have it on stencil, or did you drag it on where it says grayscale?
Oh, well, I did, but
Sounds like you may have it on the grayscale one. Or you have it on where it says alpha. Alpha.
it's not accepting
Did you save it as a PNG or a PSD?
PNG.
Um,
I mean, I get the little plus symbol, but then it doesn't take it.
let's see. Yeah, that should work just by dragging it on it. It could be that you, like, even though you thought it was a PNG, you might have accidentally. If you click on it, you might be able to source it this way. It's not like you drag it. Wait, that's not it. Wait, that is it. That is yours. We need to get rid of this and do this again. Oh, I see. Yes, loading it here. The brush thinks it's a chip. So putting it back like a basic soft brush, and let's try this one more time. You still have your Photoshop open?
Yeah. Just type the words into Photoshop and then curve them.
Oh,
You just type the letters.
whatever didn't save right.
There's
Is it here? Is that? Let's try this again. Right.
I can vary the text later.
Yeah, I made it indent, but it's still
Weird. Open to mine.
yeah. The letters are a lot smaller than the references.
Does anyone else having an issue where it's not like the stencil isn't loading anything in?
Yeah, you have to restart Substance.
Oh.
Yeah.
Save your file. Apparently this has happened to you guys before.
Yeah.
I haven't had an issue, like, what he's kind of running into, just in case anyone else is curious what the hell's happening. He's basically clicking on where it says stencil.
And it's not bringing anything.
Yeah, he's like selecting it. It's just saying something about it's error, something's in use already, and it's not doing it. He's dragging it on it. It's not happening. Thank you, Painter. So apparently we got to close out and restart it. Let's save our project.
When you do Command S and Substance, is it the same as doing Command S and like Maya and save on?
It should be, yeah.
Usually I'm used to Maya popping up something that says continue. So.
Oh, yeah, it's because you guys, you're using a student version, so it's like every time you do a save, it just is letting you know you're saving it as a student version. But that's not really a thing in Painter.
Okay, so Command S is
Yeah, it should be doing it. And Painter auto saves all the time anyway. Sometimes it's annoying because you're like doing something and all of a sudden you see that box pop up. It's auto saving it in that same folder. So if you ever like are curious if it crashed and you think you lost something, maybe you forgot to save, for a while, you should notice that. I think it's that one of these guys actually is the autosave.
It should say autosave on it.
Yeah, I don't know why. Mine might be going into a different directory. It may actually mine might not even be triggering the autosave yet because I hadn't even saved my main file the whole time until just like a minute ago.
I didn't see it load an autosave though earlier.
Okay, it's going somewhere. We'll figure that out. But so I have this thing in here. I can kind of move it around, and I'm going to hit S. So S is where we have all our controls for Stencil. S, left, middle mouse, and right mouse. So I can kind of like go to the top, hold S, and I'm going to sort of click. I'm going to right click. I'm going to get actually a lot closer to the top. And we're going to just kind of move this. And I don't really want to like paint too harsh because I'm going to get a lot of paint chips really quickly because this particular alpha, there's a ton of detail in it. But I could maybe like right around here. We're going to make this a little sharper. There we go. So what I'm doing is I'm bringing up my hardness. I'm just doing a command right click up to harden my brush. Bring the brush down. I need to paint white. And I'm still looking at the mask, but you can kind of see I'm like just basically painting white in that area. Just looking through my stencil. Bring it down. I might go over here. Maybe this is like a chunk that's kind of continuing. It's actually the same one. So let me hold S and move this to a different piece. Kind of see what's already happening. So I'm just, if you want, you can paint on the material. You don't have to look at the mask. I might drop in like a couple little dots here. Maybe we'll kind of go over here somewhere. I'm not looking for like 100% accuracy, obviously, to the reference. So don't feel like you have to get every single paint chip in the right spot. Now, if you guys pull from the reference photo, you probably could do that. You just like take that whole image from the top, make an alpha from that, just back the camera up, and just blast that thing on the whole model. And now we're wondering, why didn't I just do that? Because I'm doing this the painful way. We're talking about ID maps and hand painting this. Kind of leave that guy there, and maybe I'll go over here and we'll do some bigger pieces for this one. I'm going to grab this giant chunk. We'll do something like this over here. Is this working for everybody? Okay. If you ever mess it up, you end up painting too far, you can just erase it. This one's kind of cool though because it's not a really great looking alpha, which is sometimes works in your favor. You'll notice that I'm kind of getting like these really, well, there's not much on that one. There's these really tiny cracks that are in some of the different paint chips that actually are making these lines through them. Yeah, it's not like completely white and black. It's like a little bit of variation to it. If it's inverted, I don't know. You can actually invert it. So your paint chips are black? Yeah. Yep. But you now that you have it working, at least you kind of know what to do. So I'm not going to spend the whole time painting around this guy, but there's a lot of that on the top. You'll notice there's quite a bit of that going on like the inside wall. If I would kind of come back here. Where is this? That one's real dark. You can't see anything. Yeah, this one. So some of it's still in the threading. Again, you could hand paint that if you wanted to. Some of it over here. There's not a whole lot of detail you have to put in this spot. And it would be the same thing on the bottom. Now the bottom is really dark because of the way the light's interacting with it. So this is the bottom of the pulley. If I hit C to look at my color, I could paint it this way. And then just use the stencil and put in some details. Okay. Now a couple other things you guys can do is notice there is indented. This is like the model number on the top. You could also put that in there. You could create that in Photoshop. It's going to be a little easier in Photoshop because this is a curved piece of text. You can't. There are ways to bend stuff in Painter using like a warp tool, but it's awful. It's really, really clunky, and it's not. It's going to be very difficult to get that to curve the right way. You guys know how to bend text in Photoshop? Okay. If anyone gets stuck on that, let me know. If you just
You make like a curved path,
No.
Text tool, and there's like a little thing up the top that allows you to do the curve.
Yeah, just use the text tool. Like start with like a black background. Just type in whatever you want it to say, like those little numbers there, and then you can at the top of the Photoshop menu, you'll notice there's a little button you can do to start curving it.
I used to have to go to the path and then get my text on and click on the path and then I can type it on.
Yeah, you can also do it that way. The hard part about this is just getting it to like have the right curvature. What you may want to do, exactly, is grab your UVs as like a reference, so you kind of know what the top looks like. That way, when you're putting the image on there in the text, you actually can see the UVs and you can bend it. You could also just save out a UV snapshot. Have you guys ever done UV snapshots?
Yeah, I'm doing it too.
Oh, duh. Of course you did. You turned it in for our project. Oh my god. So yeah, you could use a UV snapshot, save it out, and then use that. All right. Now I also do want to show you guys the anchor system. So anchors are really, really powerful in Painter. It's one of my favorite things in here, but it's a little tricky to kind of wrap your head around it. So you know how before when I was doing the ID map, when I pulled that blue color, it looked really bad, like it was all jagged and aliased. It wasn't a really clean look. Now, I know how to fix that in something like Photoshop. Like if I had that issue pop up in Photoshop, I could blur it and do some levels on it and add like grunge detail to it to break it up. But you can't really do that with it set up as like a effect layer, because like if I were to pull, like if I use the color selection to pull blue again, you can't really do anything with that, right? It's just that's the way it is, and you better hope it looks good. This is where anchor points comes in.
Quick question.
Yeah.
How do I change the opacity or lower the opacity of
Of the brush?
the stencil?
Oh, like visually. You're like, yeah, it's under your display settings. So click on display, the third button down, go to the bottom, and it's that stencil display opacity. All right, here's anchor points. I'm not expecting you guys to do it, but I think it'd be kind of fun if you tried it out. All right, let's give this a shot. We're all going to set up an anchor point. You can see the magic. What we're going to do is we're going to set up a empty paint layer near the bottom here. So that's like where it says add layer, not a fill layer, just like this guy. Click add a layer and move this to the bottom of your document. And I'm going to name this Rust Circular Edge. Just kind of naming it according to what the effect is we're about to create. So this is an empty layer. If you do a fill layer by mistake, just delete it or turn off all the material properties so it's not doing anything. We don't want any of this stuff. It's like an empty layer just hanging out. Now what you're going to do is on this empty layer, make a black mask. And then on the black mask, do add color selection as an effect. And I want you to pick the blue color like we did before.
Oh, it's based on the IDs.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You should, it might not, like, you're not going to see anything change in the viewer because this is an empty layer, so it's not doing anything. But if you were to look at the mask, you should notice that it looks like there's that same chunky color showing up, but it's white. Yours is cleaner? It could be due to like the resolution you picked on that, you did 2048. Even if it is thinner, it's probably not a big deal. Now, remember how earlier I was saying like the issue with this was I wanted to blur it and try to like fix some of the aliasing? That's kind of why we're setting it up this way. So instead of me just dropping this in the mask for the paint, I'm doing it separately first so I can put a blur, add some noise to it, and then we're going to use this at the top. So let's try putting a blur on this terrible looking line. So on the black mask, we're going to go up here. We're going to pick add filter. So blur is a filter. We're going to click add filter. The filter box, you're going to click it and pick blur. And you can see it's already trying to soften it. And I'm going to blur mine. Just blur to the point where you don't really kind of notice the aliasing. So you might have to go a little farther than you kind of hope, like maybe out to here. So I'm kind of pushing mine quite a bit. So it's softer. Now what I want to do is try tightening it up a little bit. So blur, now we're going to go up to the effects and we're going to pick add levels. And let me save this again before I do this. Add levels. And I'm going to move, oh, and there she goes. This is what I was, thank God I saved it. There's no recovery.
That does not happen to me.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone else runs into this. It's really
Yesterday.
like sometimes levels works. It's
Oh, that too.
let me see if I can do it another way. So I'm gonna do it again. I probably will. Oh, okay. Now we're cool. That was weird. Okay, I'm back in here. Now levels is working. I have no clue why. I basically just put a levels. So I started with this for the color selection, blurred it, put a levels, and now if I kind of move these black and white ones together, you can see how I'm almost trying to recreate the line, but it's a lot softer and like smoother. It's not nearly as aliased as it was previously. And there are little pieces where it kind of waves in, but I don't really mind that because the rust shouldn't be the same thickness anyway. So I'm going to kind of do something like that, where it's kind of like a little smoother. I don't mind the little chunky bits, but at least it's not all jagged looking. Now from here, this could be used up top. I can kind of source this to change and make sure there's rust appearing here. But it's also could use some breakup, right? Like rust shouldn't look like this kind of soft ring going around it. I want to start adding like some detail through like a generator or just a procedural. Yeah, some chunks. I want to get that in there. So we're going to do another thing. On top of the levels, now that I have this kind of fixed, I'm going to go up to the effects and add a fill. And I'm just going to find some cool procedural that has like chunky texture effects. I don't know. Let's see what we got. There's one that's called Concrete that looked kind of cool. Concrete Burnt? That was kind of cool. I had some like pretty big chunks in that guy. We'll see what happens. I'm just going to grab Concrete Burnt. I don't know. It might work. And mine's covering it because it's just set to a normal blend mode. And I'm just going to scale it a little bit and just kind of play around with the settings because I want this to be much more harsh chunks, not this. There we go, something kind of like that. Now the reason I'm kind of doing this, like setting up this like fill layer with this kind of random grunge map, it's because we're going to use this to eat away at that thick white line that we did. You guys remember what blend mode we can use to have these guys mix if I want to like start removing some of that thicker.
It's the one that's max.
So here's max. Not that one. Yeah, let's try molt. Look at that. Maybe, yeah. It's not bad. So it's kind of cool because I have some like chunky details. Now, if I wanted to still get that thin line in there, we could still technically do that. Because I could actually do a color selection. Like, there's actually ways for me to pull the same information to put that line back in there. If I wanted to keep like a really thin rusted edge on top of this guy, there's still ways to do that. I just want to quickly show you like how we use this instead of like me tweaking this forever. But let's say you kind of mess around with it, you get something like this. Obviously, you guys could do like a paint layer and manually, with a stencil, put little chunks of rust to break up the edge if you wanted to. But once you think you've got like an interesting shape for this little rusted line going around it, I'm going to get out of the mask. And we now want to use that thing that we built. So we're going to go back to the mask for the blue paint. I need to add this in here, which means I need like this black line to show up right here for the mask to remove some of the paint. I can do that with a fill. So up here, go up to your effects. You're going to add a fill to the mask for the blue paint. And you know how before we keep dragging like procedurals on it every time we do a fill layer? Watch this. This is different this time. When you make the fill, we're under properties where it says grayscale. Click the button and click on anchor points. Oh, sorry, we didn't set the anchor point. Whoops. Yeah, we'll watch this. Click on anchor point, which means you can't. Sorry, go back to the mask at the bottom, like this guy. I forgot to show you how to set up the anchor point. Jumped ahead. On the mask, like if this is the final result we want to use, if you go up to the effects, the bottom option is this thing called add anchor point. This is almost like saving this information that I can then reuse. So if I do add anchor point, you'll see that little anchor shows up. You can't do anything to it aside from change the name, so don't even worry about that. Just leave this here. And now when you go back to that fill effect that you did at the top, when you click on grayscale, you should notice you can click on anchor point and you can pick the one you did. Oh, and mine, you can see like, let me look at this. See how it's filling and covering it? What do I need to do to get this to, I want it to look like black, right? In that area. It shouldn't be covering it with white and then putting black everywhere else. Through trial and error, you guys will figure it out. But when this happens, if I do subtraction, which we haven't used yet, so this is this layer set to subtract. See what it's doing? Now the cool thing about this guy is once you actually get the anchor point working and you can tell like it's being used in the other part of your graph, you can go back to here and keep adding details to it. You can keep refining it. You can put in, you can start hand painting with stencils and paint layers. The only thing is, if you're going to start editing the anchor system at the bottom, make sure that this anchor layer is at the top. If you start adding stuff above it, the mask will only use what's below. So for example, like if you decide I want to put in like a paint layer, see how it pops above it? And I start going in there and painting. Like I'm painting, but you notice how it's not showing up here because it's above everything. If the paint was below it, it'll remove it. So that this anchor has to be at the top of this whole stack you do. And now we can reuse it. Okay. So the pulley can be pushed really far. These are kind of generally the things I wanted to show you guys today. Anchor systems and using the ID map. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to show you my pulley. Is it going to crash? Oh, there we go. So this is my final pulley. So it's a lot of really similar kind of concepts that we talked about using ID maps. And you'll notice that like once I kind of got the basic alpha working for everything, I just started going in there and like refining things. Like I even added this little like kind of faint dusting effect where the rust, you know how when like rust breaks down, you kind of get that orange kind of dust that sort of settles on other areas. I did like another layer of this faint dusting that went around everything. I have like dirt. It's kind of hard to see, but even in the corners, I'm painting like dirt specks and buildup and grunge on the inside. I'm trying to like hand paint in between the threading. And it's kind of hard to see in the reference, but the pulley actually has these like really faint thin lines that run around the inside. I don't remember which one of these I used. I think it was like stripes. I think I used this somewhere, and you can rotate them, and I just made it repeat a lot to kind of get these like very small line details. That's not that big of a deal, but it is in the reference. And I also have it on the top. This I had to make in Photoshop, or even like Designer. Like if I had to use a separate app to do this. You guys don't have to worry about that. I was just kind of getting obsessive with this thing and seeing how far I could push it. But that's kind of what mine turned out like. You'll notice there's a lot of like breakup with the roughness. Nothing's too smooth. There's a lot of like just variation to it. One thing for you guys to be careful about, and probably my biggest critique just after looking over the activities, a lot of you guys had really intense height detail, like super intense. And you probably noticed that in the render when you brought it back in Maya. I saw it on the shelf a lot, like the wood patterns were just really thick in some pieces. You can reduce the height down in Maya just by fading out that normal intensity on the normal map. Or if you think it's easier, go back into Painter and start fixing your height detail in here. I think the reason why some of you guys had it cranked up too much is because you weren't moving your light around. Because if you're looking at the model in a part of the light where it's kind of in shadow, you may not even realize how intense the height is. But if you shift right click and watch how the light moves and kind of get a highlight to show up, you may finally be able to tell what's going to happen back in Maya. So I'm always moving the light to help me identify what the height's doing. Because it's very, very touchy.